I believe that every single person will have three moments in their life where they have an idea or an opportunity that could lead to a business. It may be something that they experience that is a pain point in going through their day-to-day world. Everybody who I've ever interacted with has said, yeah, I had this idea one time that type of thing. We're all going to have them.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smart and Money Show. My name is Vlad Sherbatov, and we have a very special guest today. He's a serial entrepreneur, investor, and advisor to startups. He's also the executive director of innovation and entrepreneurship at Schulich School of Business at York University. Please welcome Chris Carter.
Hey, Vlad, how are you doing today? I'm excited for this conversation. As you know, it's one of my favorite ones.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to dive right in. You started your first business in your living room with $2,000, two PCs, and a cat. Correct me if I'm wrong on that story. I would like to know what gave you that first entrepreneurial spirit and what sparked your entrepreneurial journey?
Wow. Well, first off, Vlad, tip of the hat for doing your research and going that far back into the story. You found one of them that's right at the beginning of the whole journey. I was originally, way back when I started out, I was a graduate from the journalism program at Ryerson. And at the time, in order to get a journalism job, you had to travel to a different part of the country and sort of work your way back to Toronto. That's what the majority of people had to do. But for a whole variety of family and personal reasons, I didn't want to leave the city. And I wanted to stay here close to the people that were important to me. So I decided that I had no choice but to start my own magazine, because then if I owned my own magazine, I wouldn't have to leave Toronto and start my career somewhere else. And that really was the first entrepreneurial spark of why do I have to leave? Maybe I could just create my own thing. That happened way back in 1995.
As you look back at yourself and your early days as an entrepreneur, and now as you teach and talk to startups and a new generation of entrepreneurs, at one of the most prestigious business schools in the world, really. What do you think has changed and what has stayed the same with the entrepreneur of the old school and, let's say, the new school?
Well, one of the things that's changed is really how the ecosystem in Toronto and Canada has just grown and flourished, so that there's an incredible support network that's there to help people to think through designing their businesses or getting them funded. And I love seeing that being available there to support people who are doing all the work like you're doing, to share stories and share ideas. Back when I was starting out, that was all hidden. There wasn't really much support at all for getting things done. And even if you had to raise money, I tell a famous story where my first $100,000 that I raised was by going down to the Royal Bank Tower and riding the elevator and telling my story to executives until one of them agreed to give me the $100,000. There weren't a lot of angel networks or venture funds, and there were no accelerators at all at that point in time. So I think the biggest change is just the community of support that's there now, and that's a wonderful thing. What hasn't changed for me is that the fundamental things that make entrepreneurs successful that I saw back then in my peers and the people who were starting out originally in the community and the people who are succeeding now are still some core things that really make people work. I think the ecosystem that's here allows people to go further and faster and bigger and more global, but that really the same fundamental principles of curiosity and openness and hustle and fearlessness are at the heart of the people that I see succeeding.
So those qualities that you mentioned, curiosity, fearlessness, persistence, perhaps. Do you feel like entrepreneurship is something that can be taught? And if yes, can it be taught entirely, or are there some inherent qualities that you think entrepreneurs share?
Well, I'm going to maybe be a little provocative here, okay, as opposed to a lot of other entrepreneurs or maybe VCs, where they'll talk about the idea that you can't teach entrepreneurship. You're born as an entrepreneur. I think that is a ridiculous and exclusionary notion that is propagated by a group of people who want to make themselves feel and sound special and magical. I think that in their experience, they may feel that they always had that in them. And that's great. That's how they came to entrepreneurship, but I don't think that actually is an accurate reflection of the paths that you can take to become an entrepreneur. Let's agree that the founding, principles of curiosity and fearlessness and relentlessness could be applied in a million different directions. You can apply that in your career. You can apply that to like politics. You can apply it to charitable work and in the nonprofit sector, or you could apply that to an entrepreneurial lens. What I think you can teach from an entrepreneurial perspective is that you can show people how to harness those natural skill sets to the best and fastest benefit in the entrepreneurial space. And there's certainly an incredible number of practical lessons that you can teach in terms of like, how do you raise money? How do you recruit people? How do you like the hows of it, right? Can absolutely be taught. Many of us who started out without a lot of that type of education around us or accelerators or support systems or established mentorship networks, yeah, of course, we learned it by making 400,000 mistakes along the way. And over the course of a decade, then we finally got to a point where, we had our founding, our founding principles in terms of the how and how we make things happen. I don't think you have to learn that through a decade or two. I think that an incredible amount of that can be taught, and it can be taught by sharing the right stories and having the right guides and mentors and advisors surrounding not just people who are like minted born entrepreneurs, but just really innovative, young, bright students and graduates who have ideas and dreams and want to do incredible things. So I 100% feel that entrepreneurship can be taught. You can't make someone hungry. You can't make them stay up all night around the clock. You can't teach them to have drive and to have like the fearlessness to pick up the phone and call 100 clients in a row when 3 of them are only going to say yes. I mean, you can tell them about it, but those core principles of like what is consuming you to like succeed and to create and to build and to tell your story and to share that, you have those things. Right. But we can absolutely teach you how to do them better and do them in a more focused way and how to like achieve faster success.
Well, I kind of like to think of it sometimes as, to demystify anything, whether it's entrepreneurship as a skill, a set of skills, or like playing music or playing a sport, it's to break it down into a set of skills, right? So entrepreneurship, which is a collection of these different things that you have to learn and, at least to some capacity, be good at in order to push your idea forward. Back in the day, unless you had that exposure, you probably would have a very hard time acquiring those skills. But if you look at, if I wanted to learn how to play guitar, 20, 30 years ago, and there isn't somebody within my vicinity that is a decent guitar player that I can sit with and learn from, my chances of becoming a good guitar player are very, very slim. So as technology and access to information expanded, we are able to learn new skills easier. I think entrepreneurship falls into that too, because right now, entrepreneurship is one of the hottest things out there. And it's no longer something that you trade in your career for necessarily to pursue something, grandiose out there in the skies. It's something that people are starting to turn out of their passions, and they're turning their passions into side hustles. And then suddenly they're learning about how to register a business, how to do your accounting, how to grow a team slightly, how to create a contract, how to hire a graphic designer, those little things. And all of a sudden you're picking up like a new basket of skills that you're good at. So I love your sentiment that it absolutely can be taught. And I believe that anybody has that power in them. They just have to take the first step. But that's true for anything in life, isn't it?
One of the things that I want to make sure that when we're working at Schulich and York University, what inspires me is the idea that I believe that every single person will have 3 moments in their life where they have an idea or an opportunity that could lead to a business, an insight. It may be something that they experience that is a pain point in going through their day-to-day world, where they experience something that is like a problem, something that doesn't work, or they have an insight into something that is like a way of fixing something, or they hear a group of people around them that are talking about how they're frustrated with something. So I really want as part of teaching in the entrepreneurial studies group and building our community, that people will learn how to recognize those moments, to not be afraid of those moments, to see them as the opportunity they are. And even if they don't know what to do immediately about it, they know where to go, who to ask. They know that there's an open door with like key communities of people or programs to talk to, so they could take advantage of that opportunity. Because how many people have you met in your own life? I could say like everybody who I've ever interacted with has said, yeah, I had this idea one time that like, type of thing. We're all going to have them. So, I just think it's a better society, it's a better economy, a better future world in Canada if as many people as possible have the mindset and the understanding that there's places they can go to get help to create things when those ideas come up. We should try to like manifest as many of those insights and opportunities into new things in the world as possible, and having like a nation of innovators and entrepreneurs would just be to the benefit of the growth of the country.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on a notion that I've been noticing myself as I browse different entrepreneurial and startup communities, especially on social media, which has been such a driving force behind people both sharing information about their own journeys and really giving people access to some other very successful entrepreneurs. I mean, literally, you can just type a few words on YouTube or on social, and you can see some of the world's most successful, founders talk about their journey, right? So one of the notions that I come across fairly regularly is this idea among the young generation, perhaps not always, also adults, that entrepreneurship is not something you can learn at a regular educational institution such as a university, because the goal of the university is not to really create entrepreneurs; it's to create people that work in the workforce. It's an opinion that is not always based on real data, perhaps, but it's more anecdotal sort of stories and people that seem to have a narrative where they didn't get the education they needed in school, and then it was on them to kind of self-educate to really learn the things that are important to them. What I'm hearing from you is very, very opposite to that notion. And in fact, it seems like you're very committed to doing the opposite, which is to encourage people to recognize and take steps in that direction. I'm curious if you are familiar with that notion that I'm telling you about right now and those points of view, and what are your thoughts on that?
I always marvel and I'm amazed when groups of people who try to take their own path and carve it out in the world as if it's the only path that's there. It's just an unnecessary notion for people to champion that as like, you need to learn outside the academic system. Can you learn entrepreneurship outside the academic system? Can you learn it in alternative online learning institutions? Can you learn it by leaving school after high school, or by leaving school midway through your post-secondary career and never coming back? 100% you can, of course. Can you also learn it? And can you also become a successful entrepreneur by adapting things that you've like learned and understood throughout the academic experience? Can you adapt things that are throughout your corporate experience? You absolutely can. And I can tell you that in our community of entrepreneurs, there are so many of them that will come back to the school as alumni with very successful companies. And they'll talk about how there was a key, moment where a light went on for them in terms of like something that they could do, or a method or a model in terms of how they could, build out a company or a concept that came from a very particular class and a very particular professor. So I don't see the need for there to be this hostile kind of either or type relationship. I'm not going to sit and say that the only way to be successful is to pursue a post-secondary academic career. No, I'm not going to tell you you have to do it pursuing your master's or your PhD or that type of thing. But neither am I going to like support people who are talking about the fact that that's a silly place to go, or a place where you don't need to do that. There's a lot of people actually that are phenomenal entrepreneurs that later will come back and take their executive MBA because they realize that they've done all sorts of things in their life where they haven't understood finance in any real way, or they haven't understood, maybe they've had an opportunity to sell their business, And then they realized only too late that they probably sold it for half of what they could have sold it for if they had more deeply understood some aspects of business. Or they realized that they learned everything that they did on their own, but there would have been ways to accelerate things faster if there were things that they weren't sitting relying all the time on external experts or advisors for, or that they could have a deeper conversation with those advisors because they had other sets of principles to work with. It's interesting to me that a lot of the programs will have entrepreneurs who have been very successful who come back at the executive level and continue to study and continue to add into that aspect of what they're doing. So yeah, I don't think it's an either or. I think that there's many paths to that point. And the reality is, for a whole group of people, they're going to take a path where initially they're going to start a career track, and then their entrepreneurial journey is going to happen 4, 5, 6, 7 months down the road. We have all kinds of entrepreneurs from the Schulich ecosystem that are extremely successful food or consumer packaged goods entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Do you think they started straight out of high school, straight out of school? They could have. It's not impossible. But guess what? A whole bunch of those extremely successful individuals started with consumer packaged goods careers in some of the biggest companies in the country, right, and then learned the craft from the inside and realized they could absolutely do it on their own. And then they went out and created their own category and created their own business. So there's a lot of ways that people acquire the knowledge or the insights or the networks that allow them to go out and to have greater success. How many entrepreneurs have we both likely met who are in earlier stages of life who are saying, I really got to find a co-founder who can help me fill in this part of the puzzle? They have yet to establish their network. They have yet to go through and have their graduating class ascend into really interesting jobs and opportunities, to have the contacts for people to make those introductions, right? There's so many other benefits that really come to the table in terms of your post-secondary education, your career, and how those can influence and unlock doors for you as an entrepreneur down the road. So I just think people should think about that as well and not get fixated on one individual path. Yeah. We need as many entrepreneurial concepts as we can muster and generate in the country. So let's allow all the paths that create innovation and create an entrepreneurial mindset flourish, and let's welcome them all to the table.
Well, at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, one of the biggest challenge I see right now for new aspiring entrepreneurs is to weeding out the noise. There's a lot of noise out there. And I think it's great on one side, of course, there's so much more access to information. And I wouldn't be surprised if even, I follow some of the projects from the Schulich startups. And I wouldn't be surprised if those founders have something to teach the professors about those specific little, the blockchains and the cryptos, right? There's little nuances.
Oh, hell yeah, man. 100%. That's if people ask me, what is some of the fun part of being a job of having been a founder and being here in the school? I'm learning from the students all the time. They're unlocking new ideas and teaching things. And I think that the future of education needs to be based on the understanding that the students have as much to bring to the table and to teach and to share as the professors do. Also, I think we have to understand that the next wave of students are already something that I like to, refer to. Maybe many people have used this term, but I just use it as if it's my own. What I call quadruple hybrids, right? So, and that is that these are young people who live and breathe technology because they've grown up with it all around them in their lives. They approach the world from a design thinking service model perspective. They can tell you the way a restaurant or an operation should work differently in the digital age, or how something should be designed physically in an environment if they were to think like that. They've grown up on social media, and so they're natural marketers. They know how to tell their stories, tell their own stories on Instagram and Twitter or wherever they hang out, or TikTok, and they're thinking about how to visually and verbally illustrate points that they're making or the stories that they're telling. And then lastly, we're in a generation where self-investing and business models and money and how it's made is something that people don't shy away from, and they embrace and they look at. So you've got these waves of students coming now that are this quadruple hybrid. So you need to have a different type of educational environment, a different type of relationship with them as a professor sitting with them, because you do need to realize that they're bringing some like incredible things to the table into the classroom that you may never have experienced or taught about. And before you know it, they're going to be teaching you a new application and like saying, well, what if we did it like this? You should, and if you're going to connect with them and you're going to have a great experience that they enjoy, you should be ready to learn every day from them as much as they're ready to learn from you.
And do you feel like the academia and Schulich in particular, the business school, is it adjusting and kind of reinventing itself as well to be more aligned with the new worldview that, you know, the incoming graduates have and the new relationship with technology that they have?
Well, everything is like a transformation right now in the academic space. I think Schulich is doing really, really well in that regard. And I think that, you know, we have a whole history in the school with like a dean who was now our dean emeritus, Dean Horvath, who was legendary of looking ahead of the curve, seeing innovation and bringing in a different way of doing things. So our history of experiential education, for example, which is now the buzz all over the country and what everyone wants to talk about, is we are deep down that path and we've been there for like decades. And, you know, the original courses and programs that he brought in were right there. Now we have a new dean who is even more deeply connected to the innovation mindset and the innovation sector and the tech sector and new ways of teaching and learning. So I think the school is just has a history that was there already, but is now in an even more powerful wave of transformation. And that's why you'll see that, like, you know, people are now, you know, announcing in all sorts of parts of the world, when they're announcing that they've been accepted into Schulich and they're coming to the school, they're already talking about which courses they're coming to take and how they're coming to join the Schulich startup community and some of the specific, you know, opportunities that they see and how that's going to translate for them in terms of like joining the tech and innovation ecosystem in Toronto. So yeah, I think we're like doing really well. We're only at the tip of the transformation in terms of what we're going to do. We're going to keep changing and growing and evolving every year and building more and more incredible things.
Yeah. Well, that's really, really good to hear, because I think that as more people, even if they go and they have more information available to them, I feel like the universities will become the safe haven where you can bring all those thoughts in and perhaps ideas and look under the hood and share it with other people that have experience, that have also a level of commitment to, you know, truly analyzing and giving a thoughtful point of view of perhaps your idea. So that type of infrastructure is so important, because I feel like one of the biggest things for entrepreneurs is discipline. You know, you can watch through hours of videos about how to do something, but I feel like when you get into a classroom and you have certain like deadlines, certain things to read, certain responsibilities that hold you accountable, you start really developing those inner traits and, you know, those little pathways in your brain that become habits. And only at that point you can actually see something through and put in the work today that you know is not going to bloom until months or perhaps years, you know, down the line. You'll never get that without putting in that work. And the only downside I see right now with, well, there's a few, but one of the downsides with the self-education is because there's no filtering of the noise, and it's a one-sided conversation. You know, that screen never will hold you accountable for actually getting up and like taking that step. You know, you can tell me how to work out all year long, but if I don't go to the gym, like nothing is ever going to happen, right?
100%. And self-learning, there's that, yeah, you don't have that kind of like critical feedback loop with the faculty and with the instructors, but you also don't have it with your fellow classmates, right? So you wind up, you know, one of the most dangerous things in general in terms of being an entrepreneur is designing in a dark room, you know, having people to like ask and challenge and teach. I mean, I'll give you an example. Last year we did this program, and you've been gracious enough to join us as a mentor coming up for the Together 2022 program, where we're working with Startup India and the government of India and the students there. Last year for Together 2021, this was the beginning of this program. You could argue that I could take everything that we're teaching in that program, which is a 1-week boot camp where the students from India get teamed up with students from Canada and from Schulich, and then work towards presenting their business idea. Well, you could argue that I could put like all of that online and they could just consume it and then do their work, and then they could pitch what they have at the end of the week. Or you could argue that I could do it online, but allow them to ask questions of the instructors and the trainers. But you know what actually created the magic last year, beyond those two things, beyond the mentors being involved, people like yourselves and working with the teams, was the fact that there were students from India teamed up with students from Canada, and that they were like sharing and teaching and learning together as a 4-person unit from 2 different parts of the world with different perspectives and different ways of looking at problems and opportunities. They each had different sets of backgrounds, not only culturally and in terms of where they're from and where they live, but also from the perspective of the students from India were largely technology and science students, and the students contributing from Canada were largely the master's students in business from the business school here at Schulich. Well, just having that kind of diverse team together with people coming from different industries and backgrounds and things that they've already learned. What happened in 1 week was insane, crazy progress compared to being off and them learning on their own, because they were able to listen to each other and have people say, well, I learned this thing in class last year. Yeah, I can go develop that forecast or that method, and I can take that piece. And so where they got to in 1 week was just magical, right? And that wouldn't have happened if they were just sitting alone consuming content and learning the facts or learning the details or even the stories behind,
Right.
It would have been great. It would have been great. They would have learned a lot, but the outcomes that we saw with those student groups and the results that happened in terms of the leaps forward that those business concepts took would not have been the same without that peer-to-peer interaction and a diverse peer-to-peer interaction.
I'm really pumped for Together 22. I can't wait. I mean, I made a post about it the other day. I saw the materials from last year. I'm super excited, and I watched the videos, and those guys, they have so much passion. They are truly care about it. And when you really care about something, then you really welcome the opportunities to hone your skills and improve and take even a small step forward. So I really feel for those people. I'm going to do everything I can to help them and enjoy and learn from them. That's also that's my favorite thing as well. Is I'm a student of the game, and just to learn by talking to others. It's a great privilege to have.
Yeah, we really appreciate that, man. And also just think about the fact where we are in the world. There's a great deal of suffering and loss and death and sickness that was released by the pandemic. But if you look at the fact that something else got released, which was the world shrunk in a heartbeat related to how people can communicate and connect with each other. And you could say, well, all these tools were already pre-existing, and they largely were. But the difference is that people were forced globally into a mass adoption of them. And it's not just the mass adoption of the tech. It's that because we had no other choice, we learned how to trust each other through this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never the case. You wouldn't really trust someone over the phone, right? You wouldn't trust them over the video call if you had the video call. And you would ultimately need to go see them, and you would need to sit with them, and you would have to have dinner with them. You would have to build these relationships over an extended period of time. But now people are increasingly and incredibly comfortable teaming up together and agreeing to do amazing things together, meaning like this. Well, what does that mean? That means that the amount of time that it takes to get teamed up and to agree to do something has been dramatically shifted and shrunk compared to where it was at before. And we all know that with all the problems that we're facing on the world and on the planet, that there's going to be a wave of global communication and collaboration and teamwork that's going to be required that's never existed, before, in terms of taking pieces of puzzles or pieces of solutions or ways of addressing things differently and applying them. None of us want to wish the pandemic's existence on our fellow humans around the world at all, or our family members, and it's all been terrible. But there's also something very powerful that got released that, if we use it properly at the same time, could allow us to create a lot of new and interesting things. And I think that the Together 2021 and 22, that's part of what I'm most excited about, is that we showed that we could bring together 400 young people and mentors from the two economies, and no one had to fly anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right? No one had to there was no hotel that had to be paid for. There were no flights that had to be paid for. There was no, we can't send 200 students across the world, right? And it just happened. It was natural, and everybody understood that it was okay and it was cool. So I think we've only begun to really tap into that possibility.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about the innovation that's happened in tech and circle it back to how it impacts today's entrepreneurs and aspiring startups. So if we look at the last 12, 15 years or so, and the growth of social, which has changed how we connect, and the smartphones, which has changed how we interact, and the bandwidth that we have with information, clearly it has also accelerated the growth of the tech sector, as a business sector. And if you look at some of the most well-funded companies and sectors, I would say among venture capital, tech is probably like the lobster and the oysters in a buffet that attracts a lot of attention. And there's a lot of investments that are going into that. What I've seen over, even starting before the pandemic, but obviously now as well, as I talk to entrepreneurs, as I talk to startups and founders, I feel like there's been a shift, and I'd love to get your thoughts about it, but I feel like there's been a shift away from business fundamentals being profitability to an investor deck being one of the first steps, and profitability being pushed to the side, and the business objective. And obviously that changes how you approach your business and how you approach your goals and so on and so forth. Do you feel like in the world of increased tech, of increased investors, and even glorification that is very public out there about anybody raising funds, right? It seems like the victory is almost at the fundraising stage, when the reality is that it's really just the beginning of the journey. Do you feel like in the race for venture capital and funding, there are certain business fundamentals that perhaps you were building your businesses around, a little bit earlier, that got lost in the middle? Or do you disagree with that?
I don't think that they're lost, but I do think that there's a desire for a speed and outcome that is attached to venture capital backed businesses that should not wind up being the singular narrative, and that everybody feels like that's the path that they need to go down. I think we also need to appreciate that. I'm not going to quote the specific percentage figures here, but the Canadian economy also has an incredible, foundation that's based on small businesses all across the country that are not at that next level. The small businesses that have to pursue real immediate business models. Not that the larger VC-backed businesses aren't pursuing real business models, they are, but sometimes they're able to just have the horizon of those things be at a different level and pace. But the small businesses have to pursue those models, and they have to pursue that profitability, and they have to do it in a different way. We just need to allow that success and victory can look like a lot of different things and different approaches. We also have to understand that there's a lot of things that get glorified. I had a founder the other day who said to me that they were considering selling their business for an amount that was not significant, but just because they wanted to get that aura under their belt of having sold a company.
An exit.
Yeah. To hell with what the actual result was, right? That was kind of a next piece of the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And there was such an urgency to achieve that and potentially move on from that business, as opposed to going, maybe it's going to take another 4 years, right? And maybe even then, it could be a business that would be a $10 million business that would be really amazing, and that you could really be proud of building and having people employed by and doing really cool things in the world. But there's this urgency, if it's not going to be massive, why are we doing it? So I think we should have a lot of different definitions of success. I think that when we celebrate founders, ultimately, including the ones that do sell for a hell of a lot of money, we should also think about whether the success that's being celebrated is, have they ensured that the headquarters of that business are going to be maintained in the city or in the, wherever they're from within the country? Did they actually protect and secure the jobs of the people who were working for them and help them build the company over all those years? What does it mean to get to the ultimate pinnacle of success and actually do it in a way that is not just like a personal success, but that is a success for everybody within the economy and within the ecosystem and all the people who work for you. So it's just everything is in like, in those kind of like sound bites, as you said, of like fundraising or exits. And we need to put some more depth into celebrating these things and understanding, what are we celebrating? Are we celebrating just selling off our IP to like, our friends south of the border? Do we realize that this business, if backed differently or supported differently from within Canada or with a different approach, could have, been a global powerhouse? And are we celebrating the people who are holding on and continuing to build and aspiring to create like a truly global powerhouse company, as opposed to just selling out when they get to a point that's just too tempting not to say no?
Sure.
We just have to have a deeper thought as to what success actually is.
And honestly, it's just like social media. I mean, you can't really pay too much attention to everything that goes on around you, because then you won't have enough time to focus on your own stuff, And as entrepreneurs, we have more than enough to worry about and focus on that does not involve other founders, that like other peers or other headlines about perhaps press releases, because listen, you probably know that a lot of stuff is also not as it seems too, right? So let's stop like comparing ourselves to everybody else and focus on our customer instead, right? I feel like in your time, just because you mentioned a peer south of the border and global as well, and I really want to talk about that very briefly. You probably have so many innovative ideas come to you just from your students that you speak with. I'm curious about if you run into students that have really forward-thinking, innovative ideas, but they may have certain obstacles that are native to us and not perhaps outside. So as an example, open banking has been a hot topic in the tech finance world, because we don't have the same rules that perhaps some of other peers do. And we're trying to grow fintech and those types of companies greatly here as a country, and yet we're faced with regulatory objections that aren't allow us to go as fast. Same thing can be applied to blockchain. There's a lot of restrictions so far that we may have here that even other provinces may not have outside of Ontario, let alone other countries. So my question to you, do you run into students that have really great ideas, but they're struggling of how they're going to execute them, and they're fearful that it's preventing them from being on par with our peers outside of Canada? And if you do run into that, like what do you tell them?
It's a very fair question, and definitely there are areas where people run into that. There's probably like 1,000 different answers to 1,000 different scenarios that founders are facing with that same question you've asked. So I'll try not to give like one answer as if it's the answer to everything, but I'll give you an example of something. One of the companies that I invested in at a founding stage a while back was in the financial services sector and providing a marketing automation platform. They were set up here, built the company, selling to Canadian financial institutions, and then just realized that the speed at which those institutions were willing to change and move and do something different was such that it would take them 2.5 years to 3 years of like conversations and pilots and testing and proving, and until they could get to the point where they got a small check, the small first check. And then one day they went to sell and take their solution globally. And in the span of like 60 days, did more contracts than they had done in 3 years in Canada. One thing we have to understand, which might be like a hard thing for people to get their heads around, but I think is very important, is that then there will be exceptions to this rule. But I think that Toronto and Canada are an exceptional place to build, pilot, test, learn, gather talent, gather, opening early stage funding support, and have like incredible insights into the product and what you're building and all those things. I love Toronto. I love Canada. I love the ecosystem. But we also need to consider, as the next wave of founders, that our paths to commercialization and the big opportunity may lie outside our borders, and that we should think more globally, and we should not get stuck in terms of like thinking that our ultimate market is Canada, because we do have a whole bunch of obstacles, not only regulatory, but also that there's like so many companies that represent like major potential implementations for our technologies in the country, but in fact, they are extended operations of American corporations, right? Who dictate IT policy or control procurement, right? So that you might get pilots done in Canada, but then once it's successful, then you might have an American parent company say, that's interesting. I bet we could find a company that could do that in the States. So you have to be really careful not to become over fixated as if Canada is the ultimate market. And I've learned that at different stages in my life, both like, things that I could have done differently earlier with my own business, but also observing people who did it really well and realized when the moment came to like leverage everything that they'd learned inside the border and then to go take it to the world as aggressively as possible.
That makes a lot of sense, Chris. Thank you for that perspective. And I only have a couple more questions for you. And the first one is about, you mentioned it throughout anyone from your past experience, I'm sure there are things that you could have done differently. And I'm sure you've run into a lot of founders that you said, well, these guys did really good. I'm curious, over your experience, what have you picked up that successful founders, entrepreneurs have share in terms of their perhaps qualities or approach to execution, their ideas? And also, what are some of the most common pitfalls that you see new or also more experienced entrepreneurs fall into that's preventing them from achieving growth as fast as they could?
The number one thing that I'm looking for and that I've seen consistently in terms of being either like the real winning factor that an entrepreneur has or their ultimate downfall is their ability to listen, right? And if I look back on all the different startup investments that I've made over time, and I think about who really won, who went all the way and which were the ones that like burned out the fastest, the ability to listen and be open-minded and understand what the feedback was that was coming from the market, from staff, from clients, from advisors has been the fundamental differentiator as to who wins and who loses. Now, this is maybe a little bit counterintuitive because we've all heard the stories of the glorified stubborn entrepreneurs who told everyone they were wrong, and Steve Jobs didn't listen to people and what they wanted them to build. He told them what they needed and made it and all these things. And I'm not saying that's not true, but the danger with over fixating on particular narratives or stories is that it's like people designing their entire model of what they're building off of what Facebook did, right? It's a statistical anomaly in terms of the existence of how a company was built and what happened to it, that at that point, my view is that it might as well have not even existed, because if it existed once or twice, don't take that as the model and try to use that as replication, because otherwise you're going to have a billion failures alongside everything else. Well, I really think in terms of consistently the people that I've seen that have succeeded, they haven't been relentlessly stubborn or closed-minded in terms of what they're taking to the market. They've been really, really great listeners. They will be the kind of people that when you observe them as a founder in meetings, they will be able to stop and listen and really lock in when someone's telling them something that's really important. And then the next thing out of their mouth will be the most phenomenal follow-up question that they could ask. Not a counterpoint as to why their solution or their idea or their view of the world is the right view, and that the person who's giving them the feedback just doesn't understand. And I've also noticed, over my years, that same quality, and particularly maybe it's a particular quality inside the Canadian ecosystem and inside the Canadian, kind of psyche, is that people who listen and communicate like that get rapidly introduced to other people within our networks. Mm-hmm. And people who don't get introduced, right? Because we all have a certain way that we like to see people communicate, right? We do want people to be relentless, and we want them to be bold, and we want them to be confident. We want them to be fearless. But those qualities need to be tempered by an open-mindedness and an ability to listen and then ask great questions that I think are fundamental to people achieving success.
Right. So it sounds like there needs to be a good balance and a well-rounded individual
right.
and ability to listen, right. To learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. There's one thing I have to ask you, because you are the executive director of innovation. And so I think there isn't any better person to ask this. It's an innovative related subject. Metaverse is something that's been in the news. partially because Facebook's announcement, but changed into Meta, but it's been around for much longer than that. And most recently, I mean, one of the most popular virtual worlds right now is called Decentraland, that is already has multiple organizations and brands sort of investing into it. Barbados just yesterday announced that they're establishing the first embassy inside of the virtual world. And that virtual world has a university district, which is designed for the future to host lectures and have academia be part of it. Do you envision Schulich School of Business ever being present in the Metaverse and be accessible through virtual reality to people that are living in those worlds?
Absolutely. Now I've just got to go convince the dean, but he's very open-minded, so I'm sure he'll have a great conversation with me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, great question. And I'm when the day happens that we create those things, then hopefully you'll come hang out with me there.
I'll remember, Chris. You better believe it. And I really, really appreciate your insights. I think you've shared so many amazing things that our viewers, I know for a fact, will really appreciate. And I really appreciate it as well. So I want to thank you for taking the time. And of course, I want to wish you to have a wonderful rest of the day. And I'm looking forward to Together 22. So I'm sure we'll see each other around.
Awesome. Thanks, Vlad.